what a cumulative frequency is, how to display frequency counts in terms of absolute or relative numbers, and how to read cumulative frequency plots with continuous variables. Let's talk about what a cumulative frequency is. The cumulative frequency for a value x is the number of scores that are less than or equal to x. These histograms illustrate the difference between frequency and cumulative frequency. Both charts show scores for a test administered to 200 students. In the chart on the left, column height shows frequency, the number of students in each test score grouping. For example, 20 students received a test score between 61 and 70. 60 students had a score between 71 and 80. 80 students between 81 and 90. And 40 students between 91 and 100. In the chart on the right, column height shows cumulative frequency, the number of students up to and including each test score. So the chart on the right is a cumulative frequency plot. It shows that 20 students received a score of 70 or less, 80 students received a test score of 80 or less, 160 received a test score of 90 or less, and 200 students received a score of 100 or less. Cumulative frequency plots can display information in terms of absolute or relative numbers. Absolute numbers are raw frequency counts. Relative numbers are percentages or proportions. Let's look again at the cumulative frequency plot that we created in the previous section. This chart uses absolute numbers on the y-axis, raw frequency counts to show the distribution of test scores among 200 students. However, we could have used relative numbers, like percentages, to describe the same test results. Notice that the shape of the chart is exactly the same, whether we use absolute numbers or relative numbers on the vertical axis. The only thing that changes is the scale of the axis. Since there are 200 students, the scale runs from 0 to 200 when the scale measures cumulative frequency, and it runs from 0 to 100 when the scale measures cumulative percentage. So far, all of the cumulative frequency plots we've seen have used a discrete variable on the horizontal axis. Let's see what happens if we use a continuous variable. The chart on the left shows a cumulative frequency plot that we created previously using a discrete variable on the horizontal axis. The chart on the right presents the exact same information, except that it uses a continuous variable on the horizontal axis. Let's work through some examples to show how to read a cumulative frequency plot with a continuous variable. From the chart on the left, we see that 40% of students had a test score of 80 or less. How would we find the percentage of students with a test score of 80 or less from the chart on the right? First, draw a vertical line from 80 on the x-axis to the curve of the graph. And then, from the point of intersection, draw a horizontal line to the y-axis. The horizontal line intersects the y-axis at 40. This means that 40% of students had a score of 80 or less, which agrees with the discrete chart to the left. Let's try another example. Suppose we want to find the median test score. We know that the median is the middle score. Half of the test scores are less than the median, and half are greater than the median. So the median is the test score that has a cumulative percentage of 50%. From the chart on the left that uses a discrete variable, we know that 40% of students received a score of 80 or less, and 80% of students received a score of 90 or less. So we know that the median score is between 80 and 90, but we don't know exactly what it is. We can do better when the cumulative chart uses a continuous variable. To find the median from the chart on the right, we run a horizontal line from the y-axis at 50%. From the point where this line intersects the curve, we drop a vertical line to the x-axis. That line intersects the x-axis at about 83. This means that the median is equal to 83. That is, 83 is the middle test score. Let's review. A cumulative frequency plot shows the frequency that observations in a data set are less than or equal to particular values. There are two ways to measure frequency, with absolute numbers or with relative numbers, like proportions or percentages. And finally, we described how to read a cumulative frequency plot when it has a continuous variable on the x-axis. To find the frequency associated with a particular value, say 88, run a vertical line from the value to the curve, and run a horizontal line from the curve to the y-axis. Here, we see that 70% of the dataset has a value of about 88 or less.